"Your body will obey until my sons are born," Lone Lumberjack growled to the widow vertical bar Wild West stories. The wind whipped across the barren plains, carrying the dry scent of dust and pine. The town of Red Ridge was small, a scattering of wooden buildings clinging stubbornly to the edge of the forest. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, but the streets were quiet. Most people had already taken shelter inside for the evening, wary of the cold that crept in with the shadows. From the north, a figure appeared on the horizon, riding a tall, dark horse. His coat was dusty, his hat pulled low over his brow, and his boots left deep impressions in the hard-packed dirt. The townsfolk who dared glance from windows whispered to one another. There had been talk of a lone lumberjack in the mountains beyond the town, a man who did not speak unless necessary, whose presence could turn a quiet evening tense in seconds. He rode slowly, observing the town with sharp eyes. Every movement, every sound was catalogued. There was something almost unnatural about the way he moved, quiet, deliberate, and unyielding. His name was unknown, though rumors claimed he had lived through winters that would have killed most men. He was a man shaped by harsh lands, loneliness, and survival. At the edge of town, a woman worked in the fading light, tending to her homestead. She was a widow her husband claimed by sickness the previous year, leaving her to manage the farm alone. Her hands were calloused from labor, her face lined with worry and determination. Life had not been easy, and yet she carried herself with a quiet strength that few in the town dared challenge. When the lumberjack rode past, he stopped at the gate of her property. His eyes, dark and intense, studied her. She straightened instinctively, gripping the handle of her small axe more tightly. "You alone?" he asked, his voice low and rough, like gravel sliding over stone. "I am," she replied, steady but wary. "And you are?" Instead, he dismounted, the leather of his boots squeaking softly against the horse's side. He left the horse tied near a post and stepped toward her, each movement measured, deliberate. "I have business here," he said finally, his eyes narrowing. "It's about your future." "And mine." "My future?" "Yes," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made her pause. "Your life, it will serve a purpose until my sons are grown." Until they are ready. The words struck her like a cold wind. She instinctively stepped back, gripping the axe tighter. Fear prickled at her spine, but she refused to show it. She'd survived much already. "You? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice firm despite the tension. He did not flinch. "I mean that you will help ensure they survive. That you will follow my guidance, nothing more." The widow stared at him. He seemed so strange, so intense, and yet there was something about the set of his jaw, the hardness in his eyes, that suggested he spoke from necessity rather than cruelty. Still, the warning felt heavy, and she had no reason to trust a stranger. Before she could respond, a loud noise echoed from the town square. A wagon had overturned, and a group of raiders was charging down the street, shouting and brandishing weapons. The townsfolk began screaming and running for cover. The lumberjack's head snapped toward the sound, his body already moving with practiced speed. Without a word, he strode toward the chaos. The widow hesitated, then followed, her curiosity and instinct for survival compelling her to act. By the time they reached the square, the raiders were demanding supplies, threatening the townsfolk, and knocking down doors. The lumberjack moved with lethal precision, but he did not draw a weapon in the way one might expect. Instead, he used the environment to his advantage, toppling barrels, sliding across the ground, and knocking raiders off balance. Within moments, the tide of the fight shifted. The widow watched in amazement. The man who had threatened her moments ago was now protecting the town, his movements controlled and precise, almost like a shadow among the chaos. For the first time, she saw a different side of him. Not a man who demanded obedience, but one who carried responsibility and skill, tempered by necessity. When the raiders finally fled, leaving a trail of overturned carts and broken doors behind them, the lumberjack turned to the widow. "See?" he said simply. "I do what must be done. That includes keeping others safe." She nodded slowly, still catching her breath. She realized that his warning had been harsh, but there was a reason behind it, a reason tied to survival, protection, and duty. You are different from what I expected," she said finally. He raised an eyebrow. "Different? I thought you were something else, dangerous. But now I see that you are necessary." The lumberjack's eyes softened slightly, though his expression remained serious. Necessity is the mother of all action. "My sons, they will need protection, guidance, and the land we live on, it is harsh. No one survives alone." The widow understood, though she did not yet agree. She had spent a year managing her homestead alone, surviving winters, wolves, and the uncertainty of the frontier. She had not needed anyone. Yet now, seeing this man, so capable, so resolute, she felt a spark of possibility. Perhaps survival was not just about enduring, but about trusting, even in small ways, others who were worthy of it. The lumberjack noticed her contemplation. "I do not ask for trust easily," he said. "Nor do I ask for friendship. I only ask for understanding and obedience to what is necessary until the time comes." The widow looked out at the town, the broken wagon, and the fleeing raiders. She realized that the frontier was not a place for hesitation. Choices had to be made quickly, alliances formed cautiously, and actions taken decisively. "I understand," she said finally, though her mind raced with questions, "but I do not fear you. That much I can promise." A faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed the lumberjack's face. "Good. Fear clouds judgment. Judgment is what keeps people alive." The wind began to die down as night approached. The town settled into an uneasy calm. Fires burned in windows, and the sound of distant wolves echoed from the forest. The widow returned to her homestead, but this time she walked with awareness rather than dread. She knew the lumberjack would remain. His presence was undeniable. His intentions were bound to his sons, his duty, and now, in some strange way, to her. As darkness fell, she prepared her home for the night, stacking wood, securing doors, and glancing out at the forest where the lumberjack had disappeared briefly. She could feel his eyes upon the land, watching, guarding. And in that quiet moment she realized that survival might not be a solitary journey after all. Perhaps it was a path walked alongside others strange and unexpected, who carried their own burdens, fears, and responsibilities. The night was deep, cold, and endless. Yet for the first time in months, the widow felt a flicker of hope, not just for herself, but for the future, for the land, and for the mysterious man whose presence had shifted everything. Somewhere in the forest, the lumberjack stood, watching the homestead, listening to the wind. His sons were still far away, yet his duty was clear. He would ensure their survival, and in that pursuit he would forge alliances, face danger, and test the limits of his own endurance. And he would do it all with the quiet knowledge that the widow, strong and clever, was now a part of the fragile balance between life, survival, and the harsh truths of the frontier. The first day had ended. Tomorrow, the real challenges would begin. But for now, both the widow and the lumberjack understood something fundamental. The frontier demanded strength, courage, and above all, a willingness to act, even when the path was unclear and the stakes were impossibly high. The morning sun rose slowly over Red Ridge, casting long shadows across the plains. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, and the distant forest glowed with golden light. The widow worked quickly in her yard, gathering firewood and tending the small garden that kept her family alive. Yet she could not shake the memory of the lumberjack's presence from the night before. He had remained a shadow in her mind, a strange mixture of danger and protection. The sound of hooves on dirt drew her attention. The lumberjack appeared, his dark horse now calm and steady. He dismounted silently, his eyes scanning the horizon before resting on her. "We leave today," he said, voice low and firm. "There is work to do, and the land will not wait." The widow paused. "Leave? Where?" "To the forest beyond the ridge. There are supplies to gather, areas to secure. You will need my guidance." There was no malice in his eyes, only the cold certainty of a man shaped by survival. She nodded slowly. "Very well," she said. "I will come." The lumberjack moved with a quiet confidence, each step measured, sure of its place. The widow followed, her hands occasionally brushing the branches, listening to the sounds of the forest. Birds called overhead, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled. "I have lived in these woods for years," the lumberjack said without looking back. "I know where to find water, game, and shelter. You will learn quickly, or you will suffer. I can manage." He glanced at her briefly, a hint of a smirk on his rugged face. "I do not doubt your strength. I doubt your understanding of what is required here. Survival is not just strength. It is knowledge, timing, and patience." The forest thickened as they moved further from town. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting patterns on the ground. The widow noticed strange markings on the trees, symbols carved deep into the bark. "What are these?" she asked. The lumberjack paused. "Warnings. Trails left by those who came before. Some are protection, some are threats. You must respect them all." Hours passed as they gathered wood, checked streams for fresh water, and observed the wildlife. The widow began to see the forest not as a place of fear, but as a living system full of danger and opportunity. The lumberjack's guidance was precise: how to track a deer without leaving signs, how to find edible plants, and how to sense the approach of predators long before they appeared. At midday, they stopped near a small clearing. The widow set down her basket of supplies, her body tired but her mind alert. "You rest here," the lumberjack said. "I will check the perimeter." She watched as he moved among the trees, barely making a sound, and returned moments later, eyes sharp and observant. "You are cautious," she remarked. "Caution is survival," he said. "Haste will get you killed." As they ate a simple meal of dried meat and bread, the widow felt a strange sense of peace. Despite the lumberjack's imposing presence and his earlier threats, she realized that his methods, his harsh words, were designed to teach her, to prepare her for what the forest demanded. Later they came to a river that wound its way through the trees. The lumberjack knelt at the bank, testing the water, listening to the flow, and examining the rocks for signs of fish. The widow mirrored him, observing carefully, learning the subtle signals that indicated life. "You will need to fish and hunt," he said. "The land is generous if you respect it, but unforgiving if you take without thought." She nodded. "I understand." The afternoon shadows stretched long as they moved deeper into the forest. Strange noises echoed through the trees: birds, insects, and the occasional rustle of larger animals. The widow's senses sharpened. She began to notice small things: the way leaves trembled before an animal passed, the pattern of bird calls, the scent of water hidden behind a thicket. By evening they reached a ridge that overlooked a wide valley. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in orange and purple. The lumberjack pointed toward the valley. "This is where your homestead's future will be built," he said. "Safe places, hidden spots, areas that will protect you from raiders and predators alike. You must know it, claim it, and guard it." She realized that the lumberjack's stern words about obedience were not simply commands. They were guidance, a map to survival in a world that would otherwise take everything from her. Night fell, and they made camp in a small clearing, protected by tall pines. The widow built a fire while the lumberjack prepared traps and alarms around the perimeter. They ate in silence, the forest alive with sound around them. Afterward, the lumberjack sat by the fire, sharpening a knife with deliberate care. The widow watched him, noting the precision and patience. "Why do you care so much for your sons?" she asked quietly. It did not answer immediately, letting the question linger in the smoke-filled air. Finally he said, "Because they are the future of my line. I have seen men die for lack of guidance. I will not let that happen to them, nor will I let harm come to those who are part of our survival." The widow understood. His growl, his warning, had been harsh, but it came from a place of duty and protection. She felt a cautious respect for him, realizing that the man before her was not cruel. He was determined, shaped by loss and responsibility. The night was deep, and sleep came slowly. The sounds of the forest were both comforting and unsettling. The widow lay near the fire, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Somewhere close, the lumberjack kept watch, his senses attuned to every movement, every shift in the shadows. The next day they continued their work. They cleared small areas, built rudimentary shelters, and reinforced natural barriers. The widow's skills grew rapidly. She learned to read the forest like a map, understanding which plants were safe to eat, which paths were dangerous, and how to move silently through the underbrush. The lumberjack observed quietly, occasionally offering corrections or advice. Each instruction, each demonstration strengthened her knowledge and confidence. She began to see him not just as a man with a stern warning, but as a teacher, a guide, and perhaps even a protector. By the third day they had mapped a section of the valley, established traps, and gathered sufficient supplies. The widow could now move through the forest with confidence, her senses alert to every detail. One evening as the sun set, the lumberjack and the widow sat by the fire, sharing stories of the past. She spoke of her late husband, of her struggles and triumphs. He remained quiet at first, then spoke of winters survived alone, of the harsh lessons taught by the forest, and of the sons who awaited his guidance and protection. "You have learned quickly," he said finally, his voice softer than usual. "You are strong, perhaps stronger than I expected." The widow smiled faintly. "I have had to be. The world is not gentle." "No," he agreed, "it is not. But it can be survived, with knowledge, with care, and with allies who are worthy." They sat in silence, watching the fire crackle and the stars emerge in the clear night sky. A bond, fragile but real, had formed between them. Trust was not complete, nor was it necessary yet, but understanding had begun. The forest was no longer just a place of danger, it was a place of learning, of growth, and of preparation. And the lumberjack, once a terrifying presence, had become a guide through its challenges. The widow realized that survival, the true survival of life and land, required more than just strength. It required patience, knowledge, and the courage to accept help, even from those who seemed fearsome at first. As the fire burned low and the night deepened, both of them felt the quiet satisfaction of progress. The forest had tested them, and they had passed not by force alone, but by understanding, skill, and the growing awareness that they were stronger together than apart. Tomorrow the real challenges would begin, scouting the valley further, securing the homestead's boundaries, and preparing for threats that lay beyond the trees. But for now, they rested. And in the silence of the forest, the widow felt something she had not felt in a long time. A cautious hope for the days to come. The lumberjack watched her for a moment, then turned his gaze to the horizon, imagining his sons and the future he was determined to secure. The path ahead was uncertain, the dangers real, but with the widow learning and growing beside him, he knew they could face what was coming. And in that quiet night, under the vast sky and the whispering trees, both understood a simple truth. Survival demanded action, trust, and the courage to step into the unknown together. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth from the forest floor. The widow stirred early, careful not to wake the lumberjack. The night had been quiet, but the forest always held a tension beneath its calm, a feeling that danger could appear without warning. The lumberjack was already awake, standing near the edge of the clearing, eyes scanning the horizon. His posture was alert, every movement precise. The widow watched him for a moment before stepping quietly to join him. "The valley," he said softly, "is not yet safe. Outsiders are drawn to fertile land and water. Raiders, claimers, or worse, they come seeking advantage. We must be ready." She nodded, her fingers brushing the handle of her small knife. "I am ready," she said. They moved together into the valley, the morning sun illuminating patches of grass and the occasional wildflower. The widow had grown more confident since the lumberjack began teaching her. She could now move quietly, track animals, and identify plants that were safe to eat. But the valley held more than just nature. It held other people, and not all of them were friendly. Hours passed as they surveyed the land, marking potential traps and places to secure their homestead. The widow's sharp eyes caught details that the lumberjack appreciated: the broken branch that indicated a passing animal, the faint tracks that suggested human presence, and the unusual marks on rocks that could signal a claim by outsiders. Late in the afternoon, a faint shout carried through the trees. The lumberjack's head snapped toward the sound, and his body stiffened. "Raiders," he said quietly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "They are scouting the land." "What do we do?" she asked. "We watch," he said. "We wait. They will make a mistake." They moved silently, crouching behind a thicket, eyes fixed on a group of men who appeared at the far edge of the clearing. The outsiders were armed with rifles and wore rough clothing that suggested little discipline. They moved carelessly, scanning the valley, unaware of the pair observing them. The lumberjack whispered instructions to the widow, showing her how to track movements and anticipate patterns. She learned quickly, noting the way the raiders communicated through hand signals and the rhythm of their steps. Hours passed, and the men began to settle, setting up a temporary camp. The widow realized they were scouting for weakness, testing the land and its defenders. The lumberjack crouched low. "We cannot confront them directly. Not yet. We must prepare traps and defenses. But we will watch, and we will strike if necessary." Together, they moved through the underbrush, setting small snares and alarms along likely paths. Each action was deliberate, designed to slow, confuse, or deter the outsiders without direct confrontation. The widow's hands worked swiftly, her movements guided by lessons learned over the past days. By evening, the raiders had grown careless, their laughter and shouting carrying through the trees. The widow and the lumberjack observed quietly from the shadows, their eyes unblinking. Night fell, and the raiders' campfires cast flickering shadows across the valley. The lumberjack leaned toward the widow. "They will not expect us," he said. "They will assume the forest is empty, that no one watches. That is where we hold the advantage." The widow nodded, a mix of fear and excitement rising in her chest. This was no longer about learning to survive. This was about defending what they had begun to build. Suddenly a twig snapped nearby. Both froze, listening. A figure emerged from the shadows. One of the raiders had wandered off alone. The lumberjack signaled to the widow, and they moved silently, cutting off his escape. The man's eyes widened as he saw them emerge from the darkness. "Oh, who are you?" he stammered. The lumberjack's voice was calm, but carried authority. "You are trespassing. Leave the valley, or face consequences." The raider glanced at the trees, then back at them, realizing the strength and precision in the pair before him. He turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows. The widow exhaled slowly, her heart still racing. "We could have," she began. "We could have done more," the lumberjack said. "But the forest teaches patience. Striking too soon reveals weakness." The night was silent once more, and they returned to their camp, checking their traps and alarms. The forest seemed alive with subtle signals. The snapping of twigs, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of wolves. The widow realized that every sound mattered, every detail counted. The following morning they continued their preparations. The lumberjack instructed her in ways to use the terrain: rocks for cover, trees for concealment, and natural choke points for defense. They dug small trenches, reinforced weak spots, and laid false paths to confuse anyone who might approach. By midday, the widow felt a strange mix of exhaustion and accomplishment. Her body ached, but her mind was sharp. She had learned to anticipate danger, to think like the forest itself, to become part of the land rather than a visitor. As they rested near a stream, the lumberjack spoke of his sons, describing their abilities, their training, and the future he hoped to secure for them. "They are not yet ready," he said. "But they will be. And when they arrive, this land, these lessons, will be their foundation." The widow listened, her respect for him growing. She understood now that his earlier threats, harsh and unsettling as they were, stemmed from a deep sense of responsibility. He was a man bound to his lineage, to survival, and to the land itself. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the raiders returned, more organized and cautious. They moved quietly, testing the forest, but the traps and alarms set by the lumberjack and the widow slowed their progress. A small skirmish broke out. Rocks thrown, snares triggered, and the occasional flash of rifles. But the duo remained unseen, using the forest to their advantage. The raiders, frustrated and disoriented, eventually retreated, leaving the valley once more to the lumberjack and the widow. They watched from the ridge as the intruders disappeared into the distance. The widow turned to the lumberjack. "We did it," she said. "We defended the land." He nodded, though his expression remained serious. "We did what was necessary, but tomorrow will bring new challenges. The forest is patient, but it tests those who live within it. You have learned quickly, but the trial is not over." She understood. Survival was not a single victory, but a constant effort. The forest, the raiders, and the land itself demanded vigilance, skill, and courage. As night fell, they returned to their camp. The widow built the fire while the lumberjack checked the perimeter once more. Stars filled the sky, and the wind carried the faint sound of distant wildlife. The widow felt a growing bond with the lumberjack, not of fear, but of respect and understanding. They were different, yet united by necessity and survival. Sitting by the fire, the widow reflected on the past days. She had learned more than she had ever imagined, about the forest, about strategy, and about herself. The lumberjack's stern guidance, once frightening, had become a source of strength. She had learned to anticipate danger, to act decisively, and to trust in her own abilities. The lumberjack watched her quietly, noting her progress. He had seen countless people struggle and fail, yet she had adapted. His sons would benefit from her presence as much as she had benefited from his instruction. The night passed without incident, and the next morning brought a renewed determination. They continued to fortify the valley, mark paths, and anticipate threats. Each day brought new lessons, and each night reinforced the bond between them. The widow realized that survival was not just about defending land or gathering supplies. It was about understanding the balance between caution and action, strength and patience, fear and trust. She had learned to walk alongside the lumberjack, respecting his knowledge and offering her own insights when necessary. By the third day, the valley had begun to feel like a home, a place of potential and promise. The forest was no longer just a challenge, but a partner in their survival. And in the quiet moments, when the wind rustled through the trees and the sun painted the sky in gold and purple, both the widow and the lumberjack knew they had grown stronger together. The raiders would return as they always did, seeking advantage or mischief. But the widow and the lumberjack were ready. The valley was no longer just land, it was a statement of their resilience, skill, and determination. And when the time came, they would face whatever dangers emerged, side by side, guided by knowledge, patience, and the unspoken trust that had begun to form between them. Tomorrow, new challenges would arise, outsiders, predators, and the unpredictable forces of the forest. But for now, they rested, confident in their skills and in the bond that had grown from the harsh lessons of survival. The widow had become more than a learner. She had become a partner, ready to face the trials ahead. And the lumberjack, once a distant, terrifying figure, had become a guide, protector, and a link to the future he was determined to secure. Together they had faced the first true test of the valley, and they had prevailed. The first light of dawn painted the valley in soft gold, mist rising from the low ground and curling around the pines. The widow awoke to the quiet rustle of the forest, the air cool and filled with the smell of pine needles and damp earth. She stretched, feeling the ache of yesterday's work in her muscles, but also a deep satisfaction. She had learned more in days than she ever imagined possible. The lumberjack was already awake, standing near the edge of the clearing. His eyes scanned the horizon with a sharpness that never left him. Today would be different. He could feel it. The forest carried the subtle scent of approaching life, and his sons would soon arrive. "They're coming," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself as much as to her. "The boys are ready, and the valley is ready for them. We must be prepared for whatever comes next." The widow nodded. She had come to respect his vigilance, his patience, and the quiet authority he carried. The forest had been a harsh teacher, but together they had learned its lessons. And now the final test was approaching, the moment when the lumberjack's sons would enter the valley, and the true challenge of trust and protection would begin. By mid-morning, the distant sound of hooves reached them. The widow's eyes widened as 3 figures appeared at the ridge, moving swiftly but with purpose. The lumberjack's sons were finally here, strong, alert, and wary of the land that had been prepared for them. "Stay back," the lumberjack instructed, his voice low but firm. "Let them see the valley, the defenses, and the work we have done. Then we will meet them." The sons slowed at the edge of the clearing, scanning the landscape with trained eyes. They recognized the traps, the cleared paths, and the strategic placements of natural barriers. It was immediately clear that someone had worked with precision and intelligence. The widow watched them cautiously, unsure of how they would react to her presence. The lumberjack stepped forward. "Boys," he called, "this is the valley you will inherit. This is where you will learn, protect, and survive. And this," he gestured toward the widow, "is someone who has already proven her worth." One of the sons, tall with dark hair and sharp eyes, studied her silently. "She helped prepare this land?" he asked, a mixture of surprise and respect in his tone. "Yes," the widow said simply, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I worked with your father. We secured the valley together." The second son, younger but equally capable, nodded slowly. "Then she is one of us," he said, "a partner in survival, not an outsider." The lumberjack allowed himself a rare, brief smile. "Exactly. You will learn from her as well as from me. This is how the valley will be protected, through knowledge, skill, and trust." The third son, still cautious but observant, finally spoke. "I see why father is so cautious. The land is harsh, and those who do not respect it will fail." The widow felt a mixture of pride and relief. She had feared judgment, but instead she saw recognition. She had proven her ability to survive, to act decisively, and to support the lumberjack's mission. As the day progressed, the lumberjack led the sons through the valley, explaining each trap, each path, and each vantage point. The widow followed, offering insight where she could. She had learned the patterns of the forest, the behavior of wildlife, and the subtle cues of potential threats. The sons listened, occasionally asking questions, but it was clear that her knowledge had earned their respect. By afternoon, the first true test arrived. From the distant ridge, the sound of riders echoed through the valley. The raiders from before had returned, more numerous and better organized. The lumberjack's sons tensed, their hands moving instinctively toward weapons, but the widow placed a hand on the nearest son's arm. "Patience," she whispered. "We know the land. We have prepared." The lumberjack nodded, his own hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "Then we act together," he said. "Follow the plan. Use the traps. Protect the valley." The raiders entered the valley, unaware of the defenses set in place. One by one they encountered the snares, false paths, and natural obstacles. Confusion spread among them, their confidence wavering. The widow, the lumberjack, and his sons moved silently, striking only when necessary, their movements precise and coordinated. A short but intense confrontation ensued near the central clearing. Rocks were thrown, rifles discharged, and the raiders were driven back, disoriented and frustrated. The widow proved her courage, moving swiftly to block a path and redirect a group of intruders into a trap, her action saving one of the sons from a dangerous encounter. The final raider, realizing the futility of his position, attempted to flee. The lumberjack moved silently, intercepting him with calm efficiency. The man surrendered without resistance, understanding that the valley was no longer undefended. When the dust settled, the valley lay quiet once more. The widow, her breathing heavy but steady, surveyed the scene. The raiders were gone, their plans thwarted, and the land remained secure. The lumberjack's sons approached her, faces serious but appreciative. "You were brave," the eldest said, "and clever. You helped protect the valley when it mattered most."
The widow met their gaze. "We all acted together," she said.
"The land demanded it." The lumberjack nodded, pride evident in his eyes. "You have proven yourself, not just to me, but to them. This is how survival works, not through fear, but through respect, knowledge, and cooperation." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the valley. Fires were lit to signal the end of the day, and the sound of the forest returned, peaceful but alive. The widow felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had not only survived the trials of the forest, but she had earned the trust of the lumberjack and his sons. That evening, as they gathered near the main clearing, the lumberjack spoke quietly to his sons. "Remember this day. Remember how the valley tested us. Survival is not just strength. It is skill, patience, and the courage to work together. Protect what you have inherited and respect those who aid you." The sons nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of his words. The widow felt a sense of belonging she had not expected, an acknowledgement that she was part of something larger than herself, a shared responsibility for the land, the family, and the future. Night fell, and the stars filled the sky. The valley was calm, secure, and alive with the promise of the days to come. The lumberjack stood near the edge of the clearing, watching the horizon, his sons nearby, and the widow tending the fire. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of hope, not just for his sons, but for the life they could build together. The widow glanced at him, noting the lines of fatigue softened by relief. She realized that the harsh growl, the warnings, and the stern guidance of the past days had been a form of care, a way to prepare her, the sons, and the land itself for the challenges they would inevitably face. "You are right," she said quietly. "Survival is more than strength. It is everything we learned these past days: patience, awareness, and trust." No further explanation was needed. The forest, the valley, and the bond they had forged said it all. In the days that followed, the valley became a place of learning, growth, and stability. The widow continued to work alongside the lumberjack and his sons, teaching and learning in equal measure. The forest, once a source of fear and uncertainty, became a partner, a landscape of life, challenge, and opportunity. Lumberjack watched his sons grow stronger, wiser, and more capable with each passing day, and he watched the widow, who had started as a stranger, become a steadfast ally and a trusted member of their small family. Together, they had faced danger, learned the ways of the forest, and defended what mattered most: the valley, the homestead, and the future of those who depended on them. The wind swept across the plains once more, carrying the scent of pine, earth, and promise. The valley, now secure, stood as a testament to survival, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from unity. And beneath the wide, star-filled sky, the widow, the lumberjack, and his sons knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, prepared, resilient, and unbroken. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving, but in this valley, among the trees and the hills, they had carved a place of hope, a home built on trust, skill, and the bonds of shared survival. And so, as night embraced the land, the story of the widow, the lone lumberjack, and his sons found its quiet ending, not in conquest or fear, but in understanding, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings.